Palantir's work with the government is going to help its work in commercial, and here's why. Now, before we get into the video, I want to play a quick clip from our Palantir Weekly podcast where Grogu, someone who invested in Tesla in 2018, did pretty decently well off Tesla and Ethereum, and then went all in on Palantir, is talking about what it takes for a company to scale, what it takes for a company to go from 0 to 1, and what it really takes for a company to use the government as an anchor to fuel their commercial business. Take a look at this, and we'll be right back.
I think the thing is, like, we have to understand that majority of the tech that consumers and the commercial side gets all comes from military-based testing. So anything you currently have, GPS, all these Tinder apps, finding mates, all that crap was existing because of all the tech that was actually advanced, and then testing was done in the military side. So Palantir having that advantage at that top, allowing it to scale down, commercial is a bit of a joke compared to what they're doing in the military side right now, because the actual product is being required. So that should be the conviction rate of a lot of people to realize. But I'm just, I'll give you another example. SpaceX, we can come out and say, okay, it's hard to get into government. But if you get in the government, and we all know the budget of DOD, it's not small, it's huge. But if you get in the government, like Karp said, 2 years from now, they'll be talking about the revenue from the government that is never going to go away, which is ideally never going to go away. So you're always not going to have an issue with money. And with that funding that you're getting from the government, you can continue to grow your commercial side. Example of the Model S for Tesla.
That's a good point.
Sold the big models, came down to the Model 3. SpaceX launched the most complicated problem with reverse landing a rocket, and now you got all these contracts. Peter Thiel and Elon have been known to do the complicated things from the beginning, so they can do the more simple things later. That's how you scale a company. You don't scale a company by selling steak dinners, as Karp says, making a product so easy to sell, because that only goes certain length. You can't go too far with that. You have to do the complicated things. And the whole 0 to 1 book is all about solving the problem that nobody else is solving. And government is that problem. It was very hard to get into them, and that's why they're getting in there.
Now, there were a couple points there that were incredibly interesting from Grogu. Chris in that video was challenging Grogu a little bit, basically saying, like, government's not reliable, you know, this and that. It's like, it's hefty revenue. You don't know when you're going to get paid. All of the bear cases for working with the government. But if you get in, you get in. Okay, so we know Palantir is ingrained with the government. We know they've got contracts that many governments have not been able to get. We know they were incredibly vital when it came to vaccine distribution. When the United States needs them, Palantir is ready to call. The example that Grogu gave was an interesting one, particularly about SpaceX. SpaceX initially was a company that no one thought would succeed. They took 4 rocket launches, which took a lot of money to be able to even get those rocket launches up into space in order to finally get a reusable rocket. They did the hardest thing first before they were able to start scaling. And as a result of doing the hardest thing first, which, by the way, sounds similar to Palantir, not profitable for 15 years, and now it's finally working, they were then able to land contracts with NASA. Those government deals are sticky. Who else is sending a rocket up to space that's reusable, so you don't have to build it again, and that can actually deliver the things into space, to put the satellites in space, do everything you need to do for the government? Very few companies in the world, much less in the United States, would be able to do that. Elon Musk basically decided the hardest thing being done would enable different parts of growth. Now, if we look at something like Starlink, not only is it intertwined in all the things that are going on in Russia and Ukraine and being able to give broadband internet to places that need it, but because they were able to build a company that started with doing the hardest thing first and working with NASA and the government, now the type of scale that SpaceX is going to be able to deliver to all different types of corporations and governments in the world that need satellites, that need satellite imagery, that need internet and broadband at high supersonic levels, is going to be gigantic. And that's why SpaceX is now a $137 billion company in the private markets. They were able to raise another round of financing when the markets were crashing in 2022 because everyone realizes the potential of what SpaceX can do. This is why the Palantir governmental argument is so interesting and why I think it deepens the moat of this company, not reduces it. That governmental revenue is not going anywhere. And so if it's not going anywhere and it's sticky, and even if they don't get paid on time, they will be able to collect money from the government constantly. Palantir's Alex Karp even said that for the past 10 years, they've cagered 35% year-over-year growth with the government business, even though some years it was 0%, some years it was 60%, because the government just doesn't pay on time, it gets passed, administrations are different. But nonetheless, you need Palantir, and they've proven for the past decade that the government needs Palantir. That level of sticky revenue is going to basically subsidize all of the R&D that they're doing in the commercial sector. And what Grogu said in that clip that I thought was incredibly interesting is that what they're doing for the government makes what they're doing for commercial a joke. I mean, vaccine distribution, military applications in space, meta constellation, advanced targeting, some of the most profound uses of AI in the actual battlefield that are really hard to do, makes fixing your supply chain and just making your operations more data-driven honestly seem like a joke. The commercial business is the reason I'm invested in Palantir. I believe the governmental business is a great moat to have. It's strong, it's sticky revenue, but commercial is where this thing really, really explodes. In order for commercial to explode, you've got a massive case study on your hand with everything you're doing with the government, and you've got the actual revenue from those governmental clients to subsidize all the work you need to do for commercial in terms of sales, marketing, growth, R&D, whatever needs to be done for commercial clients. And so I think the moat of the government becomes a little bit more stronger when we realize the government is used to subsidize all the other things that they're trying to do. And the case studies we've seen with something like Tesla, SpaceX, etc., is you do the hardest thing first, and if you're doing it for the government, you have a much better chance of then commercializing that product because you've shown the use case. The use case works with the government, and the use case pays you from the government, which gives you the ability to then work on all the other things you're trying to do. They announced a collaboration with Lockheed Martin focusing on accelerating and future integrated combat system software delivered by Palantir's Apollo. This is particular for the Navy. This was announced in November 2022. They've been doing deals with Anduril Industries. Anduril, a phenomenal private company that's doing work with the military and defense. And so all of these deals they're doing with some of these larger defense contractors or even smaller defense contractors proves to me that the government wants Palantir to collaborate with other companies, particularly from a software perspective, and be able to deliver that software in collaboration with bigger hardware companies in a meaningful way to the government. That revenue is simply not going away, and that revenue can't afford to go away because the United States can't let that revenue go away because it's the safety of the United States, and we spend $800 billion something a year, which will probably only increase by 2026, to protect the United States government. So if the Biden administration was able to give Ukraine $112 billion and Palantir software is actually being critical to what they're doing and protecting their sovereignty, how much of that $112 billion can Palantir get? And this is the interesting thing about the government. They're not going to get that money from the U.S. administration to go help Ukraine. The U.S. administration is going to give that to Ukraine. They're going to make deals with Ukraine. And as a result, they're going to get some of that money from Ukraine because now Ukraine has the money to be able to spend. Is it $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, $500 million? How much is it worth to protect the nature and the sovereignty of your country? And now that you have this basically unlimited amount of billions of dollars to give to defense contractors and software companies that are helping you, how much can Palantir get? This is the exciting part about working with the government, because not only do you have a governmental product that is actually working, that is meaningful, that was iterated upon years to be able to be successful at this level, but you've got the commercial clients that want the applications of what you're doing in the government at a much more smaller scale, which means it's easier to deliver it to them. So we know commercial is big for Palantir. We know the government moat is pretty sticky, and we know that they're now using the governmental applications of things like Apollo with Lockheed Martin and integrating them into all the R&D they're doing with commercial. To me, the government argument has deepened when it comes to Palantir. It's become more exciting for Palantir, and I think it's one of those things where not many companies that are valued at $14 billion today are doing multi-billion-dollar deals with the government, are getting IL6 certification, are actually proving their software works in real conditions of life or death, not if you need to write a play in Shakespeare's voice. And as a result of that, if they can apply it to the commercial sector, we'll see where this can go. But the government moat, to me, is growing for Palantir.